thank you all for coming and for the really super presentations. I'd like to ask a question about foreign affairs and trade policies. The alliances that we've had, like NATO, have really kept the world at peace or relative peace, or kept things from getting much worse over the last 70 years. How do the candidates feel about multilateral agreements such as we've had? And likewise, what about trade policies? What about globalization? How do they feel about free trade versus tariffs, protecting American industries, labor, jobs, etc.? Thank you.
Okay, so again, the question is addressed to all the candidates. So how about I start with Lauren Pothier, please?
Sorry. Elizabeth Warren believes that we really need to completely transform the approach to trade. We come into trade with this enormous leverage because America seems to be the most attractive market. But as President Elizabeth Warren plans to not hand America's leverage to big corporations to use for their own narrow purposes, she'll use it to create and defend good American jobs, raise wages and farm income, and combat climate change, and only on our terms and only when it benefits American families. She doesn't think that free trade deals that benefit big multinational corporations and international capital at the expense of American workers are good simply because they open up markets. Trade is good when it helps American workers and families. When it doesn't, we need to change our approach. And unlike our current administration, while she thinks tariffs are an important tool, they are not by themselves a long-term solution to our failed trade agenda. And they must be a broader strategy that this administration currently lacks. And to ensure that American families benefit from international trade in the decades to come, she wants to invest in American workers and to use our leverage to force other countries to raise the bar on everything from labor and environmental standards to anti-corruption rules to access to medicine to tax enforcement. If we raise the world standards to level with American workers have the chance to compete fairly, they will thrive, and millions of people around the world will be better off too.
Lauren Lydell.
Bernie has been staunchly opposed to many of the biggest trade deals, especially NAFTA and the latest ones. A lot of it has to do with the fact that these trade deals are designed and administered by the corporate elite, that they do not take into consideration environmental racism. They don't take into consideration protecting of employee rights, employee wages, or the benefit of the 99% versus the 1%. Bernie has actually initially came out against the Paris Accord because it wasn't strong enough. It didn't take into consideration indigenous rights. It didn't take into consideration the impact that environmental racism has across the world, and that it didn't have enough people involved in the conversation. So he believes in extremely strong, people-oriented and centered agreements. He was strongly against NAFTA. He has come out against NAFTA 2.0. And he's strongly concerned about the influence of the banks that they have on these trade agreements and the biggest corporations and multinationals out there. Just very quickly from his website, we need a new trade policy that creates decent paying jobs in America and ends the race to the bottom. Corporate America cannot continue to throw American workers out on the street while they outsource our jobs and enjoy record-breaking profits. Despite the president's tough rhetoric and haphazard tariffs under Trump, we now have a record-breaking $890 billion annual trade deficit in goods. And since Trump was elected, multinational corporations have shipped 185,000 American jobs overseas. That is not acceptable. He would eliminate the incentives baked into the current trade and tax agreements that make it easier for multinational corporations to ship jobs overseas. Instead of providing federal tax breaks, contracts, grants, and loans to corporations that outsource jobs, we need support of small businesses that encourage local good jobs in America. And he goes with the expression buy local. And he just wants to make sure that strong and binding labor, environmental, and human rights standards are written into the core text of all trade agreements. Bernie's the first one, the first candidate out there that will be striking with the workers wherever they are. And he's amazing for labor rights and for local rights.
Thank you. And Brian Healy?
So I want to answer your question in a multifaceted way. So I'll start with your question about military alliances like NATO, for example. NATO's been a partnership we've had, since World War II. It's kept us safe, and it's created a strong alliance between us and other liberal democracies in Europe. What we've seen the last 2.5 years is an extremely perverse shift in American foreign policy. We're now closer today with autocratic regimes like Russia and North Korea and Saudi Arabia than we are with Germany and France and Canada. We find ourselves arguing more with our closest allies, our closest trading partners, our closest military partners, in sucking up to dictators around the world. So when it comes to our military alliances, the next administration needs to prioritize rebuilding these relationships because they have kept us safe, and more importantly, it's important not to just go at things alone. If there are global conflicts, we want to make sure that we have allies that we can count on, and we want to make sure that those allies are also doing things like respecting human rights and investing, in their people, and that it's a fair and liberal, modern democracy. Now, your second part of your question on trade. A couple people have already hit on it, but we have to rethink our trade policy fundamentally. For too long, our trade policy has almost been incentivizing a race to the bottom, where we really want to be emphasizing a race to the top. One of the ways we can do that is by leveraging our economy. We are the largest economy in the world, and that's something that we have tremendous ability to influence how other countries operate. Whether it's Brazil who's tearing down the Amazon, or whether it's other countries who are not treating their workers with respect or degrading their environment. We should be leveraging our economy and our economic strength to do good for the world and to incentivize other countries to invest and to raise their standards, to compete on a fair level, not so it's a race to the bottom. So, the country, we don't want to be prioritizing free trade at the expense of things like workers' rights and environmental protections. Now, when we come to negotiating these trade agreements, one thing that needs to change is it needs to be done in a more democratic way. Too often stakeholders are, labor groups and, environmental groups are not at the table, but oftentimes large corporations, multinationals are. And sometimes as a result of those trade agreements and the way that they're negotiated, they prevent economies from actually increasing the regulations or worker protections or environmental protections. So we really need to alter our trade policy, and this is something that Tulsi Gabbard takes really seriously, and I know her administration will.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to ask Melissa Mayer to address that issue with Bill Hess' question.
You know what? Thank you very much for the question, and I'm going to pass on this one. Thank you.